10 more golds than the United States, and their baseball team also won a gold medal today. They beat Puerto Rico 18-3, so they pretty much cleaned up.
Yeah, I would say so. Good news for the American League East. Toronto, they now lead with 3 games to pad, a little bit of pad over the Detroit Tigers.
That'll do it for
Jonathan
us.
Mann.
More news with Jonathan Mann.
This report just in, coming from the respected Reuters news agency, quoting a report out of London. It says that Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev is no longer exercising his duties. Reuters news agency reports that the Soviet Vice President Gennady Vanayev has taken over from Gorbachev as President of the USSR because of his health. This report from TASS news agency, monitored in London by Reuters. Once again, Soviet Vice President Gennady Vanayev has taken over, Reuters reports, as President of the Soviet Union because of Mikhail Gorbachev's health. We will, of course, be following that story closely and reporting back as developments become available. We return now to the big story that we have been covering so far in this evening, and that is the hurricane, Hurricane Bob. The eye of the storm is now near Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. North of Cape Hatteras at Kill Devil Hills, the deserted streets echoed with the roar of hurricane-force winds. You can see the winds there. We'll be going to commercial. We'll be back after this.
This is CNN.
CNN Weekend continues. I'm Jonathan Mann. We have an extraordinary bulletin that has just come in from the Reuters news agency out of London. Monitoring TASS, the official Soviet news agency, Reuters is now reporting that Soviet Vice President Gennady Vanayev took over as President of the Soviet Union on Monday because of Mikhail Gorbachev's health. TASS news agency, once again monitored by Reuters in London, reporting that the Soviet Vice President has taken over for Mikhail Gorbachev. Continuing to our top story this evening, the eye of the storm, Hurricane Bob, is now near Cape Hatteras, North Carolina.
This is a CNN special report.
It may be the end of an era of openness and optimism for the Soviet Union. Reports from the Reuters news agency and the Associated Press now say that Mikhail Gorbachev no longer sits as the head of state of the USSR. You're looking now at pictures of the announcement on Soviet television. The announcement that Soviet Vice President Gennady Vanayev took over as President of the USSR on Monday because of what TASS, the official Soviet news agency, calls Mikhail Gorbachev's failing health. There were no details from TASS or the Reuters news agency. Vanayev, the vice president, issued a decree that he took over the office in accordance with the Soviet constitution, once again because of what TASS called Mikhail Gorbachev's failing health. The man who has led the Soviet Union through an era of great change, openness, glasnost, and optimism, led it to greater cooperation than ever before with the United States, and led it, it has been said many times before this, to the end of the Cold War, is now, it would seem, out of office after coming under attack from conservatives within his own government and from the military. Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev of the USSR now no longer in office because, TASS says, of failing health. This report coming from the Soviet news agency, being quoted by both Reuters and AP. Trustworthy reports that the man at the head of the Soviet Union has lost his office, it is said, for official reasons because of ill health. We'll have more on this breaking story and, of course, Hurricane Bob later in the evening. Now we go back to Inside Business, already in progress.
This has been a CNN special report.
I'm Jan Hopkins. Thanks for joining us.
CNN Weekend continues. I'm Jonathan Mann. We have 2 breaking stories at this hour. The first, Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev is, according to the official TASS news agency, out of office. According to TASS, in a report that moved just moments ago, he has been replaced by his Vice President, Gennady Vanayev. We're joined now on the line by Steve Hurst, CNN's Moscow correspondent, with the latest on this very, very surprising announcement. Steve?
Jonathan, indeed a surprise, as you said. Vice President Gennady Yanayev, according to the official TASS news agency, has taken over as president of the Soviet Union as of today, Monday in the Soviet Union, citing Mikhail Gorbachev's health. Mr. Gorbachev had been in the Crimea at his dacha vacationing since August 4th, but was to have returned to Moscow today for the signing of the historic Union Treaty, that treaty designed to keep the country together as of tomorrow. So far we have, pardon me, no further details about what has happened. The streets in Moscow look calm this morning, Jonathan.
Has there been any indication up to now that Mr. Gorbachev was in poor health, or can we speculate that maybe the reason was something other than his health?
Well, excuse me, I think it was definitely his political health. The leadership here, the conservatives, have long been badgering Mr. Gorbachev to get tough, to do something about the economy, to do something about the restive republics, and I think this is definitely a sign that given his vacation, given that he was out of town, out of the power center, they had decided to take over. This is definitely, I don't think, Mr. Gorbachev's health, physical health.
Steve Hurst in Moscow, please stand by. We'll be back right after this.
I really think they're here.
This is CNN.
CNN Weekend continues, and recapping our top story, a story of immeasurable import. According to the official Soviet news agency TASS, Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev has been replaced by his vice president, Gennady Yanayev. The agency cites, quoting here, Gorbachev's inability to perform his duties for health reasons. No word on where Mr. Gorbachev is at this hour or his condition at this time. We are still joined on the line by CNN Moscow Bureau Chief Steve Hurst. Steve, can you tell us who is this vice president and what can be expected of him?
Gennady Yanayev took over as vice president a little over a year ago, and at the time I think it caused some consternation among the liberal and reformist circles in the Soviet Union, because he was seen at the time as very much a hardliner, a member of the right wing of the Soviet Communist Party. He had been doing some work in the Soviet trade unions, and it sent a chill through the liberals here. It was during a time when Mr. Gorbachev was seen to have been taking a turn to the right, seemingly influenced by the Soviet military, and he seemed very, very concerned about that. This report this morning in an unusual broadcast by Soviet television was also announced to the Soviet people as they were heading off to work. We have just heard that an extraordinary commission has been formed here, and that it is going to be headed by Dmitry Yazov, the defense minister, and Boris Pugo, the interior minister, and others. So I think we have a clear sign here that whether Mr. Gorbachev is in fact ill or not, we have on our hands here a putsch from the right wing of the party, the military, and the police forces.
Are there any signs? Let me interrupt you there. Are there any signs, in fact, in the streets of the police or the militias or the military taking positions around the capital?
So far, we have seen nothing, but we've been unable, Jonathan, to make a thorough check of the city at all. But a cursory check of the streets looks like any normal early Monday morning here, people heading into work.
It seems, Steve, that this is really what has been predicted by a lot of Mr. Gorbachev, his closest confidants, for quite some time. They have all been saying that the Soviet Union, rather, was either headed for a dictatorship or a coup. Is that what we're seeing here?
Well, it's really hard to make any flat statements so far, but all of the evidence seems to show that Mr. Gorbachev has been ousted and that he is being replaced, at least in the interim, by a group of people who had been viewed as right-wingers, hardliners. So it seems very much as if in fact Mr. Gorbachev is not sick, that the people who have taken over are those people who have been pressuring him from the right wing of the party and the military.
These are hours that history will certainly remember. CNN Steve Hurst in Moscow, please stay with us for a moment. We're going to follow our other top story this evening, and that, of course, is Hurricane Bob. John Didakis is on hand with the latest details. John?
Jonathan, Hurricane Bob just... Now we return now to Jonathan Mann with the latest on our breaking story on the Soviet Union. Jonathan?
Thanks, John. Recapping that story, Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev is, according to the official Soviet TASS news agency, out of office at this hour, replaced by his vice president, Gennady Yanayev. The White House, we are told, has now been informed. President Bush is apparently checking with officials on the situation. There has been no official comment from the White House, but President Bush, in his vacation home at Kennebunkport, Maine, is aware of the situation and is learning more from his officials. We are, of course, awaiting comment from the White House. We go back now to to Moscow Bureau Chief Steve Hurst in Moscow on the line with us. Steve, can you tell us, is it too soon to get some sense of the reaction of the Soviet people to this very momentous news?
Well, so far, I think the Soviet people, Jonathan, are probably almost shaking their head in disbelief, or at least certainly saying, well, we figured it was coming, we hoped it wouldn't come this soon. Soviet television made the announcement to the Soviet people about 20 minutes ago in a broadcast that was probably seen by all of those up early getting ready to go to work, saying that Gennady Yanayev, the vice president of the Soviet Union, a man who had not been in office too long and a man who had sent some fears through the liberal camp here because of his conservatism, had taken over as president for Mikhail Gorbachev, who could no longer perform those duties for health reasons. We were just on the phone with a former close Gorbachev aide who had just returned from the Crimea, where Mr. Gorbachev has been vacationing since August 4th, who said it was clearly not Mr. Gorbachev's health, that he had been in good health, and it was obviously...
Well, indeed, Steve, if I can interrupt you on that exactly, Agence France Presse, the French news agency, is now reporting that the new Soviet president has declared a 6-month state of emergency throughout the Soviet Union. Once again repeating that, Mikhail Gorbachev's successor as president of the USSR has acted very quickly. Just moments after we learned, in fact, that he has taken office, Gennady Yanayev has declared a 6-month state of emergency throughout the Soviet Union. It certainly does look as if things are about to change, doesn't it, Steve?
Well, it certainly looks as if things are going to be put on hold here at the very best. A special commission has been formed, according to the Soviet TV announcement. This follows a TASS news agency announcement of the whole change in the leadership. Soviet television said that Mr. Khrushchev, the man who runs the KGB here, the internal police service, Dmitry Yazov, the defense ministry, and Boris Pugol, the man in charge of the interior ministry, all of the police in the Soviet Union, were forming a commission to look into what next to do, and we're probably the men actually running the country for the moment. So we'll just have to see what measures they take. Obviously, that is a very conservative, and from a Soviet point of view, right-wing group of men. So if they're going to change things, we would think that they would probably change things according to their ideological lights, which certainly aren't Mr. Gorbachev's or what we've seen of him in the past 6 or 8 months, and probably historically over the 6 years of his rule.
Steve Hurst in Moscow, thanks very much for that. We will, of course, be following this story very, very closely. Once again, recapping, Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev is, in fact, no longer president of the USSR. Just moments ago, we learned that he has been replaced by his vice president, Gennady Yanayev, and Yanayev's first act as president of that country has been to declare a 6-month state of emergency. We'll continue after this, joining Week in Review in progress.
This has been a CNN special report.
This is CNN.
This is a CNN special report.
Hello, it is morning in Moscow, and with the new morning has come news that will shake the day. At 7:30 a.m. Moscow time, Muscovites and the rest of the people of the Soviet Union are learning that Mikhail Gorbachev is no longer the president of their state. TASS, the official Soviet news agency, has announced that Gorbachev has been forced to step down for what it says are health reasons, to be replaced by his vice president, Gennady Yanayev. We're joined on the line by CNN's Moscow bureau chief, Steve Hurst, with the latest. Steve?
Jonathan, indeed, a morning of chilling news for the Soviet people, perhaps for all of the world. We can see on Soviet television ongoing bulletins, one being broadcast right now, an announcer reading increasingly chilling statements about what is happening now in the Soviet Union. The Soviet news agency TASS has just sent across a story of quoting Gennady Yunayev as addressing the heads of state and government in the world and the UN Secretary General. I quote from that statement. He says, "At the instruction of the Soviet leadership, I thereby notify that a state of emergency is introduced in individual localities of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics for a period of 6 months from August 19, 1991, in keeping with the Constitution and laws of the USSR. All power in the country is transferred for this period to the State Committee for the State of Emergency in the USSR." And what is most chilling is the nature of that committee, a newly formed committee which is apparently now running the country, a group of very right-wing people in the former Soviet leadership under Gorbachev, now perhaps leading the country. Let me read you a bit more from what TASS says about that. The Soviet leadership today declared a state of emergency in parts of the country, the unconditional supremacy of the federal constitution and legislation throughout the land, and the formation of a state committee for the state of emergency to govern the nation. The statement said that, 1, in view of Mikhail Gorbachev's inability to perform the duties of the federal president and the transfer of federal presidential powers in keeping with the Constitution of the USSR to Vice President Gennady Yunayev. Point 2, with the aim of overcoming the profound and comprehensive crisis, political, ethnic, and civil strife, chaos, and anarchy that threatens the lives and security of the Soviet Union citizens and its sovereignty, territorial integrity, freedom, and independence. Point 3, proceeding from the results of the popular referendum on the preservation of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, and 4, guided by the vital interests of all ethnic groups in the country and all Soviet people, the Soviet leadership resolves, number 1, that in accordance with various paragraphs and articles of the Constitution, USSR state law and emergency regulations, and with demands by broad popular masses to adopt the most decisive measures to prevent society from sliding into a national catastrophe and ensure law and order, to impose a state of emergency in some parts of the Soviet Union for 6 months from 4 a.m. Moscow time on August 19, 1991.
Steve, if I can jump in right there, if I can jump in, Steve, from what you're reading, it really does not sound like Mikhail Gorbachev's health is the first concern of the people who have replaced him. The obvious question at a time like this, given that this does look like a very political change at the top, is what can you see in the streets? Is the military, which has been feared at a time like this, or the police or the militias, in evidence at all? Does it look like it has been an armed coup d'etat?
Well, so far there's no sign whatsoever that it's an armed coup d'etat. I think it's clearly right now a political push from the right wing of the Soviet Party. But on this committee that is running the state of emergency are some very powerful people who would be obvious candidates to run a coup d'etat had it happened. There's Viktor Khrushchev, chairman of the KGB, Mr. Pavlov, who is prime minister of the USSR and a very far to the right political figure, Boris Pugov, who is the interior minister, a man in charge of the farmers union, Mr. Starodutsa, Tizayov, who is in charge of some of the state enterprises, Mr. Dmitry Yazov, Marshal Dmitry Yazov, the defense minister, and Gennady Yunayev, the acting president, formerly the vice president of the country. So there is no sign of any sort of liberal slant to this group of people who have taken power, they say, for 6 months under a state of emergency.
Steve, what we're seeing is, as you mentioned, a change of faces at the top, a change of the people holding the reins. Is it too soon, is it premature to say that we're also seeing the end of an era and a change of the atmosphere and the environment that has led to some spectacular change and some great optimism in the Soviet Union?
Well, I think one is always loath to make predictions, and one will have to see what really works out in the country. But I think that it is clearly two things have happened. One, Mr. Gorbachev has been removed, and not for health reasons, certainly not his physical health, perhaps only his political health. He was on vacation, a classic way of changing leadership in the Soviet Union. The same thing happened to Nikita Khrushchev back in the early 60s when he was on vacation after a couple of attempts to push him out of power. And I think what we see also happening is that the people who were holding on to power in the old power structures, the party, the army, the KGB, the Interior Ministry, just began to find that things were simply intolerable. They could no longer watch the country move the way it was moving. And some of their words, which are indeed frightening, using words like civil strife and chaos and anarchy, an overstatement, certainly, but the country has been reaching towards those states of aggravation, and I think that they decided they couldn't wait any longer.
Steve Hurst, it hardly needs to be said that this is an event that will have repercussions far beyond the borders of the Soviet Union. You're watching the situation for us in Moscow, and we're going to come back to you shortly, but it needs to be said that President Bush, who is on holiday in Kennebunkport, Maine, has been apprised of the situation. There has been no official reaction from the White House yet. He is apparently checking with his closest officials. Elsewhere around the world, reaction has been very quick in Tokyo, where it is just past 2:35 in the afternoon. The Tokyo Stock Exchange has apparently been the scene of some dramatic reaction. We go now to CNN's Todd Benjamin in Tokyo. Todd, what can you tell us?
Well, Jonathan, you're right. News that Mikhail Gorbachev has resigned is sending the Tokyo stock market reeling. The Nikkei, which was down nearly 1,200 points, is recovering slightly, but is still getting clobbered in thin trading. The Japanese have the Soviet Union in their backyard, and there's concern from a regional security standpoint. Also, while relations have been improving under Gorbachev, they still remain icy, and the Japanese, though, had been hoping at some point to resolve a bitter territorial dispute involving 4 northern islands seized by the Soviet Union in the closing days of World War II. That dispute has stood in the way of the two countries signing a peace treaty. I think the market is also worried about the impact the change in leadership will have on economic reform, the possibilities of increased trade between Japan and the Soviet Union, as well as the impact this will have on increased trade possibilities with Eastern Europe. So at this point, the Tokyo market is nervous, but the latest figure shows it's recovering. It's down now only 682 points, so they seem at this point to be having a change of heart and to be taking the news somewhat in stride.
Todd Benjamin in Tokyo, thanks very much for that. Recapping the story, there has been a historic change in the reins of power in the Soviet Union. Mikhail Gorbachev is now, according to the official TASS news agency, out of office, no longer president of the Soviet Union, replaced by his vice president, Gennady Yanayev, who has declared a 6-month state of emergency. One man is gone, an era may be over. We will, of course, be watching this story very, very closely. We have been, in past hours, watching a different story, a very different kind of story. Now, here's John Didakis with more on Hurricane Bob.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm John Didakis at the CNN Center at Atlanta. We'll be watching Hurricane Bob the rest of the night. Now back to Jonathan Mann with another big story.
Our top story this evening, Mikhail Gorbachev out of office in the Soviet Union. The TASS news agency reporting that Gorbachev has resigned his post for reasons of health. Steve Hurst, CNN's Moscow bureau chief, reporting that the reasons may be nothing connected with Gorbachev's health, but rather his political stature and his goals for the Soviet Union. President Mikhail Gorbachev out of office, replaced by his vice president, Gennady Yanayev. We'll be following that story closely, as will we be following Hurricane Bob. Now we go back to World Report, or rather, World Report, already in progress.
This has been a CNN special report.